Hey everybody, this is Dr. Flight, and we're going to have a little session here on this video on integrated marketing communications. And specifically, we'll look at a communication model, what IMC is all about, integrated communication marketing, and also the ADA model, which is a information processing model that consumers and people use in order to gather information and then make decisions. And so that's something that we want to kind of leverage as we think about how we communicate to our customers and how we motivate them to behave in ways that we want them to behave. So first and foremost, though, let's just tackle this idea of integrated marketing communications, IMC. And I'll refer to IMC, and that's a popular term in marketing in general, but I'll refer to that from time to time. So just knowing what this is, the idea of an IMC is that we're going to use messaging techniques. The messaging techniques should be synergized. They should go together. In other words, they should support each other. They should deliver the same message. And also, those messages that are coordinated should also support the other marketing efforts we do, for instance, in product development, branding in particular, product delivery, distribution strategies, pricing strategies, and so on. So in other words, the message that we send also communicates those other elements at the same time, and they go together. So the goal of IMC, or integrated marketing communications, is to ensure that everything that we do as it relates to the marketing mix flow together, and there aren't inconsistencies which would cause confusion for the respondent or the audience. Okay, so some goals then that we have in IMC is to produce a consistent image or concept for our brand. So consistency, again, across the 4 Ps in the marketing mix, and then across all the different messaging elements that we have, is important. We want to reinforce the brand's meaning for the customer. So in other words, the customer has an understanding of what your brand is about. We want to reinforce that and support that and confirm that for the customer. But also, as we do the IMC, we're focused on communications. So we're communicating something, and we want some outcome to happen as a result of that communication. So results are absolutely important. When we talk about communications, we're talking about focusing on things that cost money, that come at a cost to the firm. And so we want to know what the results are for the expenses that we have. Okay, as we think about communication, then let's take a look at a communication model, which we in marketing have used for many, many years to help explain how communication works. This model, though, emanates and comes from communication studies. It's not something that's original from marketing, but we use it as we use other theories and other techniques from other fields. This is one that we would also use from another field, and it's appropriate for what we do. So on this map here, you're going to see 6 different pieces or components. And we're going to talk about each one of them in turn. So the first one will be the sender. Again, we'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, but this would be the person or the company or the originator of information who has something they want to communicate. The information that we share needs to be what we call encoded. So it needs to be put into symbols or something that can be understood by others. The message that's encoded has to be delivered And so we have communication channels to do that. And finally, somebody receives that message that has been encoded. It's been received through some type of a medium, whether it's a speech or a newspaper or a TV ad or whatever that medium is. The receiver internalizes that information, processes it, and then reacts. Okay, so those are the four main components. There's two other components though. Noise. Now, noise is going to be something that interferes with or helps to conflict the message, and it creates a disconnect between the sender and the receiver, basically. And then finally, feedback. So, while we might represent the firm and we're delivering a message, we want to know if that message was received and if it was acted upon through feedback. Okay, so those six components then make up various elements that some of which we can control, some of them which we need to manage around. So those will be things that we can talk about. And just as a side note, the whole communication process in marketing, at least, includes several entire fields of professional work. So there are many job opportunities that deal with communications, especially in marketing. And so entire professions have grown out of this model that you see right here. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's six of these areas, and so we'll look at each of these six. Again, the sender is the one who has a message that should be delivered to others. We need to make sure we adjust and manage our message. This message is going to be something that relates to some business outcomes that we have, whether they're to motivate people to buy our product or come into the store, or maybe we want to build awareness. So this message is related to like just educating people on who we are and what we do, or again, letting them know we have a product that could satisfy their needs, just that awareness piece. So again, the message then is changed or adjusts depending on what we want to accomplish as a result of our messaging campaign. But ultimately, the sender is the one who is seen as the origin or originator of the message that we have. Okay, second piece, as I mentioned, was encoding. Okay, so I have a message that I want to deliver, but I have to put that, so a message is a thought or an idea, but it has to be converted into something others can understand. So we take a message, we take this information we want to deliver, and we encode it. We could encode it by symbols such as letters, numbers, and words. That's something that we often do. Images, like a picture, can have a lot of meaning, and that could encode message. We could do sounds, body language, things like that. Facial expressions, they convey information as well. So as we encode, we put our information into some type of a mechanism that others will be able to decode and understand. Okay, and we'll look at an example of encoding in just a second. Communication channel, the third element on this page. So when we talk about communication channels, again, we often talk about mediums, like what medium of medium or device are we using to transmit a message. So we can have, again, print, TV, billboards, radio, speeches, catalogs, telephone, the internet, web pages, apps, emails. So in other words, what device are we using that will carry the message to the receiver? Okay, and again, these all cost money, so there's a cost associated with all of this. There's also an effectiveness related to all of these based on our message and kind of what we want to achieve. So again, there's an enormous amount of analysis and research that's done to choose a communication channel or medium. So that's that element though. Getting back to encoding, I mentioned that there's a lot of different ways to craft or to create a message that delivers information that you want. Here's an example of a print advertisement. So this is, you see, in a magazine by Ralph Lauren, and this is the whole advertisement. So, you can say, well, what do they want to deliver? What message are they trying to give to me? If I'm looking at this, I need to decode the message that they have encoded in this image. And so we see a group of people, men, women getting together. They're drinking wine. It's a sort of a nostalgic, faded out kind of colored scheme in terms of the lens and the photography. The group looks, they're young. They look probably professional and career oriented, perhaps. Maybe they're on vacation, maybe they're socializing together, maybe it's after work, and they look confident. So, all of these things, sophistication, some elements of contemporary, but also nostalgia may be embedded in this, some type of friendship or community, shared passion together or experience together, something along those lines. And again, I'm interpreting this, I'm decoding this message. You may decode the message in a different way, and you might see other things that you relate to in this image. And Ralph Lauren, at the same time, they have some elements they're trying to probably, message us on. If we are a customer of Ralph Lauren, we might be able to expect these outcomes or these images or elements that we see in this particular print ad. So again, coding a message is part of the process, and it's kind of an art, but it's also kind of a sophisticated arrangement. Remembering that the recipient has to decode the message, right? So receivers, that would be the last part of the four. They're the intended audience of the message. So typically when we look at our receivers, we're looking at our market segment. So remember back when we did targeting and we did segmentation, we had these market segments that we were going to try to reach. So we created a profile that would describe the typical member of that market segment, and we would understand how that market segment typically receives information, how they process information, kind of the nuances and motivations of that market segment. And all of those things need to be taken into consideration when we decide, for instance, the channel to use and the type of message we're going to use and our encoding technique and, things like that. They will then decode the message. Two elements remain: noise, and then finally feedback loop. So as I mentioned, this idea of noise is any interference or anything that's going to come into play that will affect, if you will, the receiver's ability to decode the message, right? So this could be a physical thing, like if you have a radio ad and there's a lot of static in the radio and people can't quite hear the message, or it could be psychological. If somebody's really, if their attention is somewhere else, then they're not going to think or attend to your message, and that could act as noise. So if they're disturbed or if there's a disturbance that draws somebody's attention away, then that could be considered noise too. Final one is feedback loop. And again, feedback loop is something we use to measure the effectiveness of our ad. We want to know how many people heard it, if the right people heard our ad, in other words, the people who are in our market segment. We want to know if they acted on our ad, if our ad was effective in getting them motivated to do what we wanted them to do. or our message. I keep saying ad, but I should say message. And so again, the feedback loop then tends to be really, really important to us. Okay, so that's this idea of communication, the design of the model that we can use. Mentioned this idea of channels a little earlier. We're going to talk about this a lot in another video. But just if you're not, again, clear on different types of channels, in marketing, we have a very specific set of 5 different channels. Sometimes we call these the promotional mix. And again, you're going to see this a lot, so this is one reason why I mention it now. Again, to give you a little bit of perspective, we have advertising, which again we'll talk about in the future. Sales promotions, so thing that we can do to stimulate demand and bring awareness to our product. Public relations, that's a component of the promotional mix. Direct selling, or personal selling, I should say personal selling, and then direct marketing, and finally online marketing or social marketing. Okay, so the online social marketing has kind of been added over time. And a lot of the things we do traditionally can also be done online. So for instance, we can advertise, but we can also advertise online. So some of these categories kind of overlap a little bit, but again, these categories though make up what we call the promotional mix. So those are the tools we use then to deliver our message and to create, achieve the goals that we have in our IMC. Now, let's spend a little bit of time talking about how people process information in order to make decisions. Okay, there's a popular model. Again, this is derived from psychology and kind of information processing, not originally from marketing, but it's something that we use, and it's called the AIDA model, AIDA. The AIDA stand for awareness, interest, desire, and action. The AIDA model, though, is a model it's called a hierarchical processing model, where one step is achieved, and then the next step is achieved, and then the last step. In this case, the AIDA model is built on 3 distinct steps. One is cognition, or thinking, like thinking about a problem, thinking about an issue. That's the awareness step. The second stage is affect or emotions, which are generated through interest and desire, the I and the D. And then the final one is behavior, and the behavioral stage, and that's captured in action. Okay, so the idea is you think about something, then you form an opinion, and you have some affective reaction to it, and then you do something. So you think, you feel, you do. And that is an order or process that we feel like we think that people perform before they buy a product or as they take an action. So the AIDA model then captures that 3-step process. Awareness is the cognitive thinking portion, where we have to make people know about our product. Creating interest and desire is a persuasion, attitude, affect, emotional kind of component, those 2 things. And then getting somebody to act is the behavioral component. Okay, so tie this in. Think about as a person makes a decision, or as they choose to do something, how they think about that, and then how we as a marketer and as a communicator can influence that process. Okay, so the AIDA model, attention, we first must gain the customer's attention. So there are things that we do, like we give them a message, and then we ask them if they remember the message. Do they know about the message? Are you aware of our brand? Are you aware of what we do, of our product, or our features? Those types of things, right? So after awareness comes interest. Okay, so AIDA, right? So interest is next after awareness. Um, we want to get somebody's curiosity developed, right? So we want the customer to further investigate our product. This is like in the decision-making process, the search and evaluation portion. When you search for information, that's what we want people to do. It's a piqued interest. And it leads to a liking or a desire for the product. Again, this is like in persuasion, what we want to do is convince people that, well, if you know about our product and you like it, we want you to like it enough to do something about it. We want you to desire it, to wish you could have it. Now, this might be positioning your product away from competitors and illustrating how your product is maybe better or more substantial than others' products. And then finally, we have this idea of action. Let's do something to appease our desire, right? Let's do something to satisfy our need or want that has been generated. So that's what this ultimate piece is. Buy the product, visit the store, talk about our product. What do we want the customer to do as a result of hearing our messaging? This is the action that we try to define. And so that's one of the goals then of the communication process, that we want an outcome to happen. And that outcome is something that we'll ultimately measure. All right, so I mentioned this idea of hierarchy where one thing happens before the next. So the AIDA model captures this, and it's leveraged on this process where, again, one step happens and then the next step happens after the first step. So that's a hierarchy of action or effects. And in our case here, again, we have the cognitive, where we think and learn through awareness, through building awareness and educating our customer. Then the next step is the emotional feel or affect, and then finally a behavior or do or an action. So these stages are again captured in the AIDA model. It's a hierarchy of effects model, and it moves from the basic level of thinking to feeling and then to doing. Okay, so as we look at, oh, sorry, one more thing before we wrap it up. Okay, we're about to wrap it up. The last element here is something called the lagged effect. And we'll get into this, we can get into this more when we start talking about frequency and effectiveness and some things like that. But one of the things we know is that this process doesn't work in isolation. So in other words, hearing a message once is not effective. People hear a message and they don't act. They might become aware, or they might hear your message 5 or 6 times and then become aware. But then they need to also hear some different messaging that gets them interested, and then some different messaging that maybe persuades them, and then finally they need to be committed to do an action. So this is something, the lagged effect means that after we message, sometimes it takes time, or it takes time for the message to sink in, but also to take effectiveness. So multiple exposures are often necessary. We have 2 terms here that are good to think of. One is this idea, which is, again, it's a term we use called effective frequency, and it's something we actually measure. Effective frequency is the number of message exposures needed for the message to be remembered. So the typical number or average is somewhere between 6 and 7. So 6 and 7 times you hear a message, 6 or 7 times, it begins to sink in and you begin to remember it. So, that's why advertising has to be something that's ongoing. It can't be something you do once and then never again. It has to be repetitive, right? The other thing is when we start talking about the communication process, we start talking about how effective the ad is or the message is, we call it ad or message stickiness. So some messages are more impactful than others. Like, think about like a real effective speaker who gives a real rousing, strong emotional speech. You could hear that and then you could go out and you could behave. But then again, if you hear a message and the speaker is not that exciting or not that enthusiastic, you might have to hear that message several times before you actually go out and behave. So in other words, the stickiness is the effectiveness and the degree to which the message is remembered easily. Okay, so again, this is kind of a big thing we're talking about. So these are some pieces to it that are worth considering. Okay, so now we can wrap up. All right, so as you go through here, there are 4 things that, to kind of recall and practice. 1, explain the different steps of the communication model or process. Remember, there are 6 different ones. We want to define each of those. We want to define and describe the AIDA model, the AIDA, right? We want to understand that AIDA captures a concept called a hierarchy of effects. And in this case, it's the learn, feel, do model, where we have to learn first, then we have to have an emotional, affective, or, kind of response, and then we need to be motivated to do, to act in an action. And that's what the AIDA model captures. And then finally, think about this idea of message repetition and this idea that there's an effective frequency, so that you have to hear a message a certain number of times before it sticks. However, some messages are more sticky than others, are more effective, I guess, than others. Okay, so this is an introduction to the IMC, and let me know if you have any questions. All right, thanks.